This is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Thomas Dabbs, broadcasting from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. This is a non-commercial broadcast, so we've shied away from asking viewers to subscribe or follow us. However, having subscribers, which is free, helps us to gain support from grant agencies and to continue this series. So if you like us, please tap or click the red subscribe button on YouTube on the lower right-hand side of your screen, or the follow button on your podcast. This talk is with two scholars. First, Agnès Lafont, who is a member of the Institute for Research on the Renaissance, the Neoclassical Age, and the Enlightenment, IRCL, at the University of Montpellier III. And second, Lindsay Reid, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Galway. They are currently collaborating as editors for a forthcoming Revels edition of the Maydes Metamorphosis, which is a little-known late Elizabethan play about sex and gender identity. This talk is made possible with support from the Aoyama Gakuin Institute of the Humanities. Agnès and Lindsay, the work that both of you do can never be accused of lacking erudition. Agnès, your work on the reception of classical myths in Renaissance England is superb, and you also work on the plays of Shakespeare, his contemporaries, and also the poetry of the period, with a great interest in Ovid and the influence of Ovid and other classical models on those people during the early modern period, both in France and in England, and of course, French rewritings of Ovid that shaped English reception of Ovid during that period. Lindsay, your primary research and teaching interests include early modern literature, classical poetry, mythology, adaptation, and reception studies, broadside ballads, and early English print culture. You also work on the reception of the classics during the early modern period and have published abundantly also on the topic of Ovid's reception during this period and on Shakespeare's Ovid and other things. So the reason we invited the two of you here is first to ask you about the recent work you've collaborated on, specifically the Maydes Metamorphosis, a late Elizabethan play about sex and gender identity. With the keyword metamorphosis in the title, we know that we will strongly feel the presence of Ovid, which both of you, Ovid is something that both of you have worked on. So Agnès, may we ask you first for a description of the work that you're doing with Lindsay?
Yeah, thank you for your kind introduction, Tom, and hello, everyone. You're absolutely right. Lindsay and I both come from the field of classical reception. Both share this interest for Ovid, erotic mythology, and Renaissance culture. And so this pastoral play was indeed a wonderful opportunity to work together. And it all started really because we wanted to make that anonymous play available for teaching and for discussion for the community. And so, as you said, the play dating back 1600 was published as an anonymous play and first performed by the children of Paul's. And so it's kind of a standard play in length, 1900 lines or so, but it's rhymed decasyllables and prose, and indeed it centers around the story of Eurimini being transformed into a man in Act 3 to avoid being sexually assaulted by Apollo, and then retransformed into a girl at the end of the play so she can live happily ever after with Ascanio, her lover. So why that play? Why we chose that play? Yeah, it speaks to contemporary students as well as to us. Gender identity quite radically explored for the period because we have this change on stage. This really surprises and pleases students really, and helps us frame our discussion in a sort of safe space because it's distant in the past. So, right. So that's the first reason why we were attracted to that play. It's also a fun play, right? Fun because it's kind of a fairy tale play. The pastoral is conducive to like sort of humor and well-known elements that the student recognize. For instance, the beginning of the play starts, Eurimini is led to the forest by two wicked courtiers who obey the Duke's command to kill her. And they don't. So it's kind of a Snow White flavor to it. There are singing competitions. There is an echo scene. But also the students find it really sort of intimidating because it's old. So it must be serious. And so the second reason was we wanted to share that fun with the students, and the production was the idea to make that come across. And the third reason is a very selfish reason that Lindsay and I are sharing, is that because we are Ovidian scholars, we want people to read more Ovid. And so many stories from Metamorphosis are actually in that play. You have like the references to Iphis and Ianthe, Atalanta, Daphne. I mean, it's all it's very rich, but it's also interesting because it's anonymous. So it's not Shakespeare. It's not intimidating, I guess, in a sense. Yeah. So because it's an Ovidian play with many references to gender-bending episodes, Iphis and Atalanta and Daphne, all those staples, we find it's really interesting to consider that play not just as an other Lily play, but as the voice of a minor sort of author anonymous, who's also testifying of the Latin poet's vogue on the stage in the early years of the English 17th century.
Yes,
so
excellent.
That's the third reason.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Lindsay, what I want to ask you now, of course, you're in Galway. I think you're in Galway now, right? Is that correct? Yes. And Agnès, you're in Montpellier. So you guys are, you're a good bit apart, so you're collaborating. And I want our viewers to know I did not prepare you for this question, but I think you probably have the answer. What is it like collaborating on an edition? And this is for all of us nerds out there who are really interested in the how you do this, right? I love collaboration. I love the idea that you decided to do that. You're both interested in the same thing. You're not competing with each other. You're working together. How does that work over email and communications and so forth? How do you divide up things? That sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess one of the kind of interesting things about this editing project that we're working on right now is that it's sort of, the whole thing was kind of born actually out of a desire to do something together. And that's really kind of the origins of the project. We kind of knew first of one another's work. And then we met, I guess, when was it? 2017 or something like this. It might have been the first time that we met in person, and we really kind of hit it off. And so in the wake of that, we were looking for, kind of what is something that we could do together. And so it was kind of out of conversation that we landed on the idea of doing an editing project that would kind of speak to both of our interests in Ovid. And so we then kind of came across the Maydes Metamorphosis as a really great understudied Ovidian play that deserves, we believe, much more recognition for the really kind of interesting things that it's doing. So it was, in a way, kind of us thinking about what could we do together, what would be interesting that we could do together, that brought us to the project to begin with. But then I mean, we had some difficulties actually in terms of kind of getting things started with the collaboration, because we had initially applied for a grant, and it's a special grant to kind of promote Irish and French research collaboration specifically. It's called the Ulysses Grant, that's jointly funded by the Irish Research Council and Campus France. And so this grant that we were successful, we had applied in 2019 for it, and we found out, I think in late February 2020, that we'd been successful, but the grant could only be used to support travel for these research collaborations. So basically, as soon as we won the grant, we couldn't actually use it to travel. And we had thought initially that we would be able to kind of use that grant to do travel and kind of be in the same space to get things started. Eventually we kind of got extensions on the grant period and things like this. Eventually we did manage to get some travel out of that grant, but it kind of really delayed things. So we actually, from the beginning, just because of the timeline of the project, we've been kind of having periodic Zoom meetings. We have had difficulties. We've kind of used different systems of kind of sharing documents. We were originally using Microsoft, and then kept kind of getting locked out because of permissions in one of the other's universities. So we've moved to a Google Docs system now. But we've really been working through a system of kind of shared docs and Zoom meetings for the most part, with kind of occasional trips back and forth. And I think we're both really fortunate. We both, I think, really like having the opportunity to go visit the other one. we both live in sort of attractive places for tourists. So you know, so we do have you know, some kind of back and forth actual kind of in-person visits, but we've managed, and I think it helps that from the get-go it was kind of COVID times when we got started on it, and so we kind of settled quite quickly into a kind of Google Docs and Zoom routine.
Okay, so as you're doing this project and you're working from the 1600 publication, the year 1600, and that's curious in itself. It's the revival of the near what is the revival of the Paul's Boys after roughly a decade of hiatus. And they're coming back. It shows up in Hamlet. There's, you know, and there's a kind of well, we're not quite sure exactly, but in terms of authorship, I'm going in that direction. However, let's come back to that. Let's move forward to readings. You guys have been involved with readings and productions of the project, and a fabulous production. I want to start, Lindsay, with you. Tell us a little bit about the readings and the productions of the project.
Yeah, so one of the first things that we did with the play is we kind of tried to do the modernized text. And so we started out with and in some ways it's an easy play to edit because there's only one printed quarto edition from the early modern period. So we started out by trying to kind of modernize the text for kind of a contemporary audience. And so the first thing that we did in terms of readings is we worked with the Beyond Shakespeare Company in 2022. So it's just about, I think it was this time of year, just about 2 years ago, they took our modernized script as it was at that point and did a reading of the play that was based on that script. Which then got turned into a podcast, which is fantastic as well. So that was kind of the first experiment with the Beyond Shakespeare Company, and that was really quite helpful to us to kind of hear the text aloud for the first time, with, you know, the involvement of some professional actors as well. So that was really kind of fantastic, and we certainly in that reading kind of caught some things about the text, and you know, there were some things that we wanted to go back and revisit after that, words that we wondered, is that actually the best way of modernizing that, and things like this. But then after that, and actually I'm probably not the one who's best poised to speak as much about this, but we had then a sort of collaborative venture that emerged with Perry Mills, which is really what then kind of took things to the next level and really kind of brought things to life on stage. So Perry Mills is kind of the longtime kind of artistic visionary and director of the Edwards Boys Company, which are based in Stratford in the UK. and has a long history of kind of bringing to life early modern plays with kind of contemporary grammar school boys. And so there's a kind of ongoing relationship between the research center in Montpellier and the Edwards boys at this point. The Edwards boys have actually traveled a couple of times, I think, to France as part of this kind of collaborative venture. I think it's 3 times now that they've been there. And so we were able to in part kind of build on that existing collaborative kind of arrangement that they had, and that existing partnership, which has become more formalized over time. And so we, via that kind of collaborative partnership, we were able to kind of attract Perry's interest in this play. And it was quite interesting actually talking to him as the play kind of developed, because I mean, in some ways, my sense of it is that he agreed to do the play at first in part because there was, a researcher in Montpellier who was working on the play. They had this kind of existing relationship, but he didn't necessarily, he said, think it was a great play early on. And it was actually only after working with the play that he actually really, really came to love the play as well. And I think for us too, we thought it was a very interesting play for lots of reasons, and kind of lots of academic reasons to begin with, but actually, seeing it performed and seeing that whole kind of performance come together in the spring of 2024, I mean, it actually makes me kind of realize it's a good play. It's a good play in ways that you didn't quite know just from reading it on the page.
Yeah. Well, Agnès, would you like to, well, I'll prompt you and you can go anywhere you want with this, but you have worked on the French influence on the Ovidian area, where the framework of the French translations in England shaped the views of Ovidian translators, I guess, or people who were putting Ovid into English. Now, here you have a situation where you're taking an English play and bringing it to France many centuries later, or several centuries later. And so let's just start with, how was the reception of this in France? This very difficult English, number one.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because, of course, it was a bit daunting to suggest to have the Edwards boys, so boys performing an English play for a French audience in a community theater. That was kind of because, in fact, the scheme we applied for to finance the whole project is a scheme which connects the French CNRS, the French Ministry of Culture, and the Université Paul-Valéry of Montpellier. So the idea is actually to bring culture to everyone in the city, but to do it in an informed way by using a sort of dynamics between researchers and my research center and practitioners, so Perry. So what was really, so we took advantage of that scheme, which is already in place in my research center, the Institute for Research on the Renaissance, the Classical Age, and the Enlightenment, the IRCL. And we got the biggest town playhouse in town, the Théâtre Jean-Claude Carrière, 550 seats. And we were sold out, but except it was a free performance, so we were, yeah. But so on March 26th, we had specialist students and French citizens watching the play in English. How do you do this? It's called cultural mediation, right? So in fact, been using my class, because I'm teaching an undergraduate class on cultural mediation as well, to create a sort of leaflet. And Lindsay and I had previously done like a pedagogical kit for teachers. And so that tool was sent as a sort of broil. Well, and we didn't know what colleagues were going to do about it. So it was sent by the research center to the networks in town to see what secondary school teachers would do about it. And they loved it, in fact. because of the issue also. So we got into a sort of Shakespeare and citizenship kind of project, and it worked. So they used the material in English, but also my translation students translated it into French. So we also got, like, as you say, you know, the bilingual kind of things, but we didn't, and we started translating some bits of the play with my students, but this didn't get in the way, fortunately.
Well, when you do the translation, do you translate it into modern French, or do you try to make it a little bit more archaic in translation?
That's a big issue. Right. This is a discussion. This is a choice we made. So we are trying to keep a sense of the past, but we're not doing it in an archaic manner. So we are translating for the community, for the stage, so that the play gets across. But it's a shame because it's a rhymed play, and very often there are puns due to the rhyming patterns and things. It's very difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's an issue also in modern English and Elizabethan or early modern English. And of course, it's an issue in Japanese translation, of course, trying to do that. Well, let's move on here to cover about, well, there's a summer school here, a summer project that you have just finished or fairly recently finished. And I want to know what were the goals? Lindsay, I'll start with you. What were the goals of this project? And just tell us a little bit, describe what it was like.
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting kind of scheme that neither of us had really been aware of too much before we kind of got invited to join into this project. So there's Erasmus funding, and for people outside of the EU, that's kind of the major funding that's used for European study abroad. And I was familiar mostly with Erasmus funding in terms of students who are taking kind of a semester abroad in another EU country or a year abroad in another EU country. But there's actually this scheme, which is blended intensive programs, it's called, and it's a newer addition to the Erasmus funding lineup, and it's designed so that collaborators from different EU countries can sort of organize programs that involve kind of blended learning. So there need to be kind of an online component where you have students from different EU countries kind of studying together online, and then they come together in person for kind of a shorter period. And often that manifests in things like summer schools. So the summer school project that we're currently involved in right now, it actually originated, kind of funnily enough, with someone who is not in the EU at all. So Victoria Bladen, who's based in Australia, has been for many years kind of bringing Australian students on summer schools to various places in Europe. But she then kind of was in touch with a colleague of ours who's based in Sardinia, about maybe kind of having a summer school in Sardinia. And our Sardinian colleague then kind of became aware of the Erasmus BIP funding and thought, like, well, why don't we make this bigger? Why don't we get Erasmus funding and bring in European partners in that way? So we kind of grew this network out. So it's quite international, which is really exciting. So we have students from Ireland, from my university, the University of Galway, and I'm teaching on it. We have students from Montpellier in France. We have students from the Czech Republic who are participants. We have also Italian students from Sardinia, the Australian students. Who am I forgetting? Oh, Czech Republic. We have colleagues and students from the Czech Republic involved as well. And so the idea was to all kind of come together in Sardinia, very atmospheric, and study the Tempest together for a week in Sardinia. So there's a really great kind of international mix of students, international mix of teachers on the program. And the program itself is really kind of fascinating because you've got all of those different kind of teachers coming from different contexts, with different teaching styles and different kind of interests reflected in the program as well. So it's a mixture of play readings, getting the students from kind of all over the world to actually read the Tempest together, from start to finish, and do a really comprehensive reading of the play in that way. But then also kind of workshops on various things involving kind of creative writing, some kind of more scholarly workshops as well, and then lectures from the various teachers as well. So I mean, it's a really, really kind of fun initiative, and one that we're hoping will continue in kind of new iterations going into the future.
Oh, good. Well, Agnès, what was your response to the planning and doing? I guess the language is in English. Everyone speaks English. Is that it? That's the idea.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
English is
okay.
working.
Yeah, that
and
was
you're doing the Tempest on an island. I don't know if you
yeah,
get the
exactly.
feel that you're on an island. Sardinia is fairly large, but I think you might get the feel that you're on an island there. Yeah.
Well, working for a week, with 9 colleagues in a wonderful environment like the Cittadella dei Musi in central Cagliari, excuse my Italian, was, I mean, it's really truly uplifting. The 3 Czech colleagues were really, they have a very innovative pedagogy. They use a lot elements we don't usually use. I'm a more of a traditional lecturer, so it's good for me to to get acquainted with other ways of teaching English. It was also interesting to have the second language students mixed with, of course, English speaking students. So it's good for everyone, I think, in terms of community. But I was also especially glad that this project allowed me to keep working with 5 of my French students who'd been actively involved in the Maydes Metamorphosis project in Montpellier. And so the fact that this project came after the Maydes Metamorphosis showed that we've been working together for a year, but they didn't shy away from one more week, even though it's just a week, but still, I mean, it's outside the school calendar. They had to make time for it. It was end of June. And so this reason makes me think that working on projects with students is really effective. And so the fact also that I mean, for financial reasons, it's difficult now in France for French students to travel abroad. And so these European schemes also are very important to foster that sort of sense of being together on an island, as it were. And so the metaphor was nice, I thought.
Yeah, well, what a wonderful opportunity for these students, but of course for you guys also. But the idea of Sardinia, that it's wonderful. Not necessarily neutral, but it's not Ireland, it's not southern France. It's something new, right? So both of you could experience something the newness of that, and of course the students who came in, right? It's fairly exotic experience, and what a great thing. And you think it will go on into the future or something similar, or it will grow into something else. And this is so important in our profession to engage students in this way. I wanted to pivot back to Ovid a bit and maybe pick both of your brains about this. I am convinced, I'll move to you, Lindsay. I'm convinced that the English dramatic renaissance, it used to be called more than early modern period, but something happened there. Something blew up around the 1570s that was sort of unprecedented. And I am thinking about Arthur Golding's translation of Ovid that came out in 1567. And I have worked on lost plays during that period with David McGuinness in Melbourne, and or on that group. And I just, in a nerdy way, have tried to look, and Ovid just keeps coming up and up and up. the plays are lost. You don't know exactly, but you know from the stories, from the titles, whatever, that they're just going into Golding and just pulling things out right off the bat. Now, have you seen that in your research?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting kind of question to think about what might have happened around that time. Because I mean, certainly there, Ovid is always there to a certain extent, but there is a huge kind of increase in the interest in kind of popular Ovid, we might say, as you're getting towards kind of the end of the 16th century. And I think increasingly, one of the things that I think both of us have become interested in part via the Maydes Metamorphosis a little bit, is actually the work of Lily, who's such a major figure in terms of kind of shaping in some ways, early modern English drama. And he's quite fascinating. And I guess I should maybe explain. So one reason why we kind of got to Lily via the Maydes Metamorphosis is it's an anonymously written play, but it was, many times it's been ascribed to Lily, although it's definitely not a work of Lily's. And it because it has some of those elements that people think of as being kind of characteristic of Lily, primarily a lot of Ovid. But if you actually look at Lily's surviving kind of body of dramatic works, it's incredible, how many of them actually take really kind of direct and pretty obvious inspiration from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And in Lily's case, probably not Golding's translation so much. But his play Maydes, like very obviously, an Ovidian play, loves metamorphosis. If you look through his dramatic works, it's incredible. How much he's really kind of drawing on that. And I think in some ways, I mean, my kind of sense is that there was kind of something in the air in this period, and possibly starting in kind of the 1560s or 1570s, where there is a lot of what we might think of as sort of Ovid that's being really kind of circulated in these very popular forms. So something else I've been very interested in too is broadside ballads, and particularly kind of looking at the evidence is that there are a lot of Ovidian broadside ballads, and again, a lot of those are lost too, but you can tell from kind of titles. But also we do have some surviving 16th century examples of Ovidian broadside ballads, and so you think about it, and like that makes Ovid was literally in the air in the 1560s, 70s, 80s, before you even get to kind of the 1590s, which is what we tend to think of when we're thinking about early modern drama more.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Tiffany Stern. Well, we talked very recently about her recent work on ballads. She's going in a different direction, but also it's always fascinating. All of this is fascinating. Yes, Agnès, you had a point, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with Lindsay of the sense of Ovid being there all the time. One example in Maydes Metamorphosis is the use of echo. The echo, for me as an Ovidian scholar, immediately I was looking for the nymph, right? And so I've been studying that play and bearing in mind all the French pastorals of the period, where the voice of the echo keep reverberating everywhere and being sort of a lamento. And I mean, it's a poetic trope. It's a cliche of the period, right? But in Maydes Metamorphosis, it becomes a joke. And that's what we realized with the Edwards boys when they were asking us, how do we punctuate a line? At the end of the echo scene, Ascanio asks Joculo to, keep quiet. He says, "Don't worry, boy. It is the echo, boy. It is the echo, boy." So how do you punctuate this? Do you keep capitalized E for echo, or is it just the echo boy, and do you capitalize boy? So is Ascanio speaking to Joculo, boy, keep quiet, or is it a new boy that is hiding in the woods and playing tricks and of course it's a boy company, so they have boys hiding throughout the performance and, shouting, Eurimini, Eurimini, looking for the little Eurimini lost somewhere. But this Eurimini, of course, is played by a boy. So you keep having those sort of meta-theatrical jokes, quite elaborate for a little play understudied like this, quite effective on a modern audience, because we got French students laughing at "It is the Echo Boy," and you're like, wow. I mean, it's the magic of theater, right? It's an Ovidian joke, and people get it just because it works. So I think that's the outcome of this research project, was to prove that play can actually be understood by modern audiences, not just for the gender bending things, but also because we feel things similarly, or we share experiences in a similar way, even if we're French. So I don't know. I thought it was a great sort of experience, and that was due to Ovid. So I was particularly glad.
Yeah. What came to my mind, and it depends on who is in this and how nerdy we are and where we've been, but I was thinking about Lily. It seems too late for Lily. It could be a copycat person, and there were some good dramatists out there who could carry that style. I was thinking of Galathea. When this topic came up, I was thinking of As You Like It, and also Twelfth Night. These gender bending episodes. And for people who might be listening who don't, you're starting with a boy who starts out playing a girl, who transforms into a boy, who transforms back into a girl in this play. And I get confused with all this, so I won't go into the orders in the other plays. But there is a Lily-esque thing going on here. But I think it goes straight through Shakespeare too. Shakespeare, of course, Juliet mentions Echo, so Echo's chamber. So Agnès, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was kind of saying, yeah. We've been teaching, both Lindsay and I have been teaching the Maydes Metamorphosis even before there is an edition of it, just because we were working on it, and it was nice to be sharing with our students the fact that we were establishing an edition. And also we were testing the footnotes. Where do we need footnotes? We need a bit of footnotes. But at the same time, and not the same ones, of course, because my students are French and her students, of course, should have less problem with the English. Apart from sometimes she says, no, you actually need to comment on this as well. Mm-hmm. So that's also an interesting sort of conversation of having two editors from different perspectives, I think. Anyway, so we're teaching Maydes Metamorphosis explicitly with Galathea and Twelfth Night, actually.
Yeah. Okay, Lindsay,
nice
I saw something in your background. You've also looked into medieval Ovid, I believe, and I studied a little bit. I am kind of a dilettante on this, but I think the Ovid's Ars Amatoria in particular was brought up as it was a humorous track as Ovid was writing it, or there was satire. It wasn't serious. This isn't really the art of love. But in the medieval times, when it was taken as a manual by, I guess, young men mainly, as the way to court. And there's a lot of humor in the idea of the art of love, right? And I wanted to see just kind of pick your brain and see what sort of things you've run across in your medieval research as it goes into the early modern period with this idea of the art of love. Of course, we see it with Romeo trying to be the kind of the perfect lover or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I have to say, like, I don't primarily identify as a medievalist, so I'll preface by saying that. And like, maybe if I could say a little bit about how I got drawn back into the medieval period more. I started out, I guess, really identifying as primarily a 16th century person, and that is really how I still kind of identify as someone who's primarily interested in the 16th century. But I tend to be interested in some of the mid-century stuff, some of the early 16th century stuff as well. And one of the things that I sort of increasingly became aware of, and this was not thinking so much about the amatory poetry, but thinking actually more about kind of the Metamorphoses and the reception of that, I became increasingly aware, and also the Heroides, but I became increasingly aware thinking about this, that some of these really distinctive kind of 16th century interpretations of some of the Ovidian sort of mythological material, they can look kind of quirky in certain ways. And then if you kind of go a little bit further back, you can see that actually a lot of, especially kind of mid-Tudor, early Tudor authors are going to Chaucer for their information on Ovid. And so this was something that I became increasingly interested in, is, some of these kind of mythographical details that don't actually look strictly Ovidian. Very often you can find them in Chaucer, who in turn is often, drawing from Boccaccio, and so you can kind of trace backwards, and you can find some of these things that actually aren't necessarily classical details that kind of creep into that tradition of Ovid, and you can trace a kind of longer lineage going back into medieval literature as well as mythography there. And so that's something that kind of increasingly drew me actually into Chaucer, also Gower, thinking about kind of the vernacular English tradition that was, very much still kind of a part of that kind of knowledge about classical literature for the early Tudor authors. I mean, Chaucer is still being reprinted all the time in the period, and a kind of a major mythological source actually in really interesting ways. So that's kind of where I've gone with my medieval work. But the reception of the amatory poetry, which you're asking about, is really quite interesting as well, because I mean it's part of the Ovidian canon that I think sometimes gets overshadowed by, in some ways, the flashier Metamorphoses, which is what we tend to think of these days when we're thinking about kind of Ovid and Ovidian poetry. And I mean, certainly the Metamorphoses had a huge place in early modern kind of culture and kind of the cultural imagination as well. But so did some of those other Ovidian works. And I think it is kind of important to think about, his reputation as the author of things like the Tristia, exile poetry, as well as things like the Ars Amatoria, which is, almost always, once we get to the early modern period, not actually thought of so much as in that kind of maybe medieval sense, as a kind of how-to manual, as kind of something that's often dismissed in kind of interesting ways as being wanton, and yet still, like, you can still find, even as people kind of refer to it as the wanton poetry of Ovid, it still massively influences in indirect and indirect ways, just the kind of the development of amatory poetry in English, more generally, like, you see things, if you're looking even at kind of Petrarchan tradition, you can see in all sorts of interesting ways how Petrarch and his English imitators are very much kind of influenced by some of the things that get worked through in Ovid's Amores, for example. So I think in indirect ways as well, you kind of see the lineage of that carrying through.
Yeah, yes, you get this, what would you call it? The stamp, the spirit, the imprimatur, something. You can just follow this Ovidian influence all the way through. And I wanted to tie that with Southern France, and the go way before maybe, but Eleanor of Aquitaine and bringing her poets to the court of Henry II, the love poets, the love poetry, and the sort of way it got into English culture and is still there when we're getting into more or less our period, right? So I don't know if there's a genealogy there or whatnot, but it's coming through Italy and France primarily. right? This Ovidian thing, and of course, news stories from the continent and poetry. Yes, Agnès.
Yes, I think what really interested me when I started on this strand of thinking about, you know, the fact that there is no rupture between the medieval period and the early Tudor period. It's really a continuum in the transmission of the classics because of these vernacular passages and these moments of it's not straight Latin into English. It goes through Europe, in fact, and we share that. And so I think it was really interesting because in France, the scholarship was very much oriented towards, you know, the Protestant influence and the fact that Northern European ties were really important for English development and of the culture. But in fact, Lindsay mentioned Boccaccio. I mean, Chaucer has been traveling to Italy. There's a whole, and French, as you were mentioning, Tom, French is everywhere. Everybody speaks French. So this sort of polyglot background is something that is now maybe a bit obscured by the contemporary perspective, but that's something that's certainly true in the period. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, there were so many cases. There were so many cases. Well, I'm not sure if it's so many, but there's these cases where you see a story. I think Romeo and Juliet's one of them, translated. Well, it's Italian, and it's obviously maybe an Italian story that has a sort of Ovidian texture to it, and translated into the French, and then you see it showing up in an English poem, you know, by Arthur Brooke, and early on in the Elizabethan period. You just see these kind of ripples and waves going through the continent. And as you say, it isn't a straight Oxford graduate going in and translating standard Latin text. You know, they were able to do it, but they were consulting more than one language. It's wonderful to see. There is a sort of metamorphosis in that, isn't there?
You're right.
Well, Lindsay, let's talk about what you're doing now and what you're going to do in the future, and then we'll go to Agnès and just tell us what's going on right now in terms of what you're working on.
Sure. So I guess the main thing that I'm kind of working on right now in terms of my own research is trying to finish off this collaborative project that we're doing on the Maydes Metamorphosis. So, you know, we saw these fantastic performances, this run in the UK and then France with the Edwards Boys, performing from our modernized script in March. And then since then, what we're really working on, so our edition is under contract now with the Rebels Plays series from Manchester University Press. So we have the book contract. We have a lot of work that has been done on it. So we still have a fair bit to do. For anyone who has tried doing such a thing before, you realize it's a project that expands and expands and expands. So it's kind of finishing that off. Beyond that, I have another kind of major project that I'm involved with right now, which is a Marie Curie doctoral training network. It's called Remediating the Early Book, Pasts and Futures. So it's a very large scale kind of project that is involving people from the University of Galway. A colleague of mine and I here are working on it. We're actually the coordinating institution for this project. And we're working with colleagues in Alicante, Antwerp, Bristol, Vienna, and Zurich. We have 13 PhD students who are, they all began last September. They're on this network and they're all working on projects that relate to kind of either late medieval or early modern kind of book history, manuscript history, print culture, the transition between the two. So 13 PhD students, 3 of them are based here in Galway. And the training network is kind of designed to train those students up together as a cohort in a certain way. So it's fantastic for the students who are on the network. We have kind of training activities that all of the different participating universities are organizing for them. We also have a whole range of industry partners, as they're called. You don't often hear this in the humanities. It's very much kind of a science model, this doctoral training network, but we've really kind of adapted ourselves to that and thought really a lot about the question of, well, who are our industry partners if we're a group of medievalists and early modernists? And we discovered that there are things like libraries, museums, auctioneers, booksellers. So we have a whole kind of international European kind of cohort of industry partners who are kind of part of the project as well, and offering internships to all of the PhD students on the training network. So that's kind of the other massive project that I'm involved with at the moment.
Oh, that's just wonderful. Well, Agnès, how about you? What's
Yeah,
going on now?
Well, I'm also very busy with Maydes Metamorphosis. We still, it's very much on my desk too. But I'm also engaged I'm the co-editor with Charlotte Coffin from University of Paris-Créteil in the third volume in a Brepel series entitled Polyglot Encounters in Early Modern Britain. And so it's a series, it's a Brepel series for which we're doing polyglot pages in early modern England. So it's a volume. Charlotte is also in the field of classical reception, and because we've been working with translations, compilations, and treatises, we've been revolving around mythological material. We've been seeing that, it didn't all translate into English, but it led to polyglossia. So we are familiar with the circulation of myths. And we thought about putting up a proposal about the mise en page of polyglossia. So how polyglot pages are traveling to England. What kind of polyglot volumes, apart from polyglot Bibles, of course, but there are many other polyglot manuals, language manuals, but there are also polyglot manuscripts, in fact. And so how these diverse levels of text and commentary sort of appear on the page. So it's about materiality. And we're using Anne Caldiron's book, Printers Without Borders, which is a great inspiration, and also Rachel Stenner's on the typographic imaginary. So it's also a project on book history, in a sense, just like you were describing, Lindsay. And so it's kind of a historical, it's going to be we're getting the 10 chapters now, we're rereading them, that's the stage we're at. But so we have historical chapters about the material modalities of polyglossia. We also have literary chapters of how it works on the page and how readers engage with those texts. And if those texts are specifically teaching, or how they are specifically teaching or engaging with the reader's mind. So that's what we're doing. Writers, printers, engravers, readers, everybody around the book, and staging that polyglossia. That's the project, and it's due next year. So we are.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. What I'm hearing from both of you is this sense that we're starting out with people on the outside looking in at you two and me often too. Sometimes it seems the driest, the most boring things are the most attractive things to us. And I love talking to textual editors about this, because in every conversation I have with textual editors, it always leads out to something else. You find out the person is involved actively in the theater. There's an adventure that's being done, and this is being played out here. And both you built with the summer school, you built with this project on the Maydes Metamorphosis. In both cases, an adventure has come from it. Whether you end up in Sardinia, there's travel, there's there's intellectual exchange, there are plays, there are engagements with people internationally and across languages and cultures. And this is exciting stuff. It's all extremely exciting. Well, what I would like to do is ask you if there's anything else you would like to add about what's happening, what's going on. If not, then I'm going to thank you very kindly. But anything else?
I mean, I guess in closing, I might just kind of pick up on what you just said there. I mean, I think one of the things that's been really interesting to me as my career has developed is, I think so many of us who go into academia, you start out with this vision that it'll be great because you can just work by yourself in a library and everyone will leave you alone. But I do think, I'm sort of kidding, but I think a lot of us start out, very much, with this idea, certainly in the humanities, that you're going to work alone, and that's what it means to be a researcher in the humanities. And I guess one of the things that I've increasingly learned as my career develops is that some of the most exciting things that you can do are actually by reaching out to people and making those kind of international connections with other people and being really creative and thinking about, like, what can we build? What can I bring? What can you bring? And that's where, I found increasingly, like, that's where the really exciting kind of things happen.
Yes. Agnès?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. What I really like is meeting my colleagues and also having my students around and them seeing some hope, because I find they're really worried about their future. They're very sad. They're very, I don't know. I find that when we share something, when we work together on something, then we can achieve something. And so that's what I want to do. And when I can do it with international colleagues, all the better. Then we show it's possible to do it. That's what we need to do, I think. So yeah. I agree. I started on my own, and I'm not on my own anymore.
Well, that's one of the things that spawned this series, the whole idea of coming into contact with people who are not down the hall from you. Of course, during the pandemic, we couldn't even talk with those people, and we realized how much we missed the conversations that we were having because they spawned so many ideas, and it's why we go into this to have these conversations. And this is the first time I've done 3 people, and it worked out extraordinarily well. I didn't want to let you go without letting both of you know. Now, Lindsay, I didn't know you, but in 2019, I was in Galway, and I didn't know you, and I was just traveling through with my wife, and it was the first time I'd been to Galway since 1978. I was alive then. And able to travel and walk and all that stuff. And I could not believe the transformation. And I liked Galway of '78. It was a lot of fun. There were some good bands, playing some, traditional music. But then I went and so my goodness, it was beautiful. And of course we had beautiful weather the whole time. And you have the Cliffs of Moher there. You have a kind of Ramblas, like they say in Barcelona, an area you walk, the streets that you walk down is so much fun, but beautiful town. And of course, I visited Montpellier very recently and got to meet you guys over there. And that's, again, another sort of, it's a boom town. I don't think Galway's a boom town, but it's just a transformed, sort of Ovidian town. It's a transformation took place in Galway. And Montpellier is a boom town, and I know that Agnès, you did some work in Texas, and it showed that when I came to Montpellier, I think this is reminding me of these, things that happened to the towns in Texas, like recently Austin, where you spent some time. People discovered your area, but it's just beautiful there. And so I guess you could clip this out and give it to your Chamber of Commerce. But Lindsay, you're American, right? You were American born and then made your way there.
Yeah. No, I'm from Maine originally, and I grew up in Maine, but then I actually haven't lived in America since the 1990s,
Yeah.
which might say something about my age. But no, I left America in 1999, and haven't lived there since. I did all of my university education in Canada, actually, and then came to Ireland via Turkey. So I worked at a Turkish university for
Yeah.
3 years before I came to Galway. So I've been around.
And Agnès, I forgot your background, if you have always been in Montpellier or not. I don't think so.
Well, I haven't always been in Montpellier, but I've always been in the south of France. I'm sorry. So I was previously in Toulouse, which is about a 2.5 hour drive. So I just moved closer to the Mediterranean because my second, yeah, I like sailing also.
There's a good argument for, being born in the south of France and staying there. For anyone who has not been to the south of France, it's very beautiful, but also, of course, the Galway, and I could give a shout out to Tokyo too. But anyhow, I thank both of you so much for coming onto this series and sharing your work with us. This is precisely what I wanted to do in this conversation, and you've been so wonderful in being able, and you've clarified a lot of stuff for me, and I'm sure viewers of ours. So thank you again so much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you for
having
having
us.
us.